Good morning, class. Today we're going to be learning about the Articles of Confederation, why the Articles of Confederation failed, and that led to the creation of the Constitution of the United States. So first we're going to watch a video. Hopefully the sound is good. And the sound is not good.
How many times do I have to tell you? This is an original copy of the Constitution. You can't borrow it with your library card. Dear Tim and Moby, why did they call the Constitution? A living document. Thanks, Selma. Great question, Selma. You've probably heard all about what an amazing document the U.S. Constitution is, how it's a blueprint for our federal government, how it unified 13 states into one nation, and how it's lasted more than 200 years through hard times and even a civil war. All that is true enough, but it can give you the wrong idea. Well, like that the Constitution is some sacred text, or that the framers, the guys who wrote the thing, all agreed with each other, or that we're meant to follow its rules exactly as they wrote them forever. This point of view ignores the real story of how the Constitution was born. It was May of 1787 in Philadelphia. Political leaders from around the nation were gathering to discuss changes to the Articles of Confederation. That was America's first constitution, written in 1776. The Articles had been created almost as an afterthought to the Declaration of Independence. To wage war on England, the newly independent states needed to coordinate with each other. But they didn't want to give away too much of their own power. So the Articles established a weak national Congress where each state got one vote. All it could really do was declare war and manage foreign affairs. Once the war had been won in 1783, things began falling apart. America had borrowed enormous sums of money to finance the war. Now those bills were coming due. The Confederation Congress didn't have taxing power, so it couldn't raise money to pay the debts back. Individual states owed money too. All of that debt was dragging down the economy, and things were starting to get ugly. Rhode Island had basically declared that neither it nor its citizens would be paying their debts back. And in 1786, there was a tax revolt in Massachusetts. Shays' rebellion lasted for months, and there was nothing the Articles Congress could do about it. Eventually, a local militia managed to put it down. But it was a wake-up call for the country. If America couldn't pay off its debts, no one would do business with it. And if it couldn't keep the peace, how would it defend its own borders?
The United States Constitution created a republic that has lasted for well over 200 years, but it was not the first national government of the United States of America. That distinction goes to the short-lived Articles of Confederation, without which the Constitution as it exists today might never have been formed. The the British Parliament had just about had it with their American colonists. First, they ran up enormous debts fighting the French, which respectable enough, I guess, but they now refused to pay the taxes that would fund it, and they even had the gall to argue that Parliament had no right to issue taxes to them at all. And now some radicals in Boston had ruined an entire shipment of taxable goods in a shocking disregard for tea.
Anybody remember what that was called? They threw all that tea into the harbor? Anybody? Raise your hand. Mikhail? Boston Tea Party, that's right. We learned about that before, right?
Parliament weighed their options and decided to take a risk. They would punish Boston and the entire colony of Massachusetts, making an example of them to warn other colonies against taking similar rebel actions. They shut down Boston Harbor and revoked the Massachusetts colony's right to govern itself. But there was a problem with Parliament's carefully considered, surgically precise retaliation. It sucked. After all, there were still many Americans who were loyal to the crown. Their loyalty sprang not from a fear of punishment, but from a genuine and even patriotic belief that the British government was the best government on earth, because it guaranteed representation and rights and all these wonderful things that Parliament had just deemed necessary to strip away. But the radicals and the loyalists were united in one belief: that a display of American unity would help Parliament and King George III reconsider the justice of these acts and repeal them. Delegates from the colonies convened at a Continental Congress in 1774 to draft a nice, thoughtful letter explaining their objections and asking Parliament to kindly repeal these laws. By the end of the week, though, what had been originally intended as a gentle letter of friendship had transformed into an open rebuke and a vow to embargo British goods. Many of the delegates cheered this.
Does anybody know what embargo means? Not exactly. Pablo, do you know? They were going to embargo British goods.
Like destroy?
Well, it means they're not going to buy them. Embargo means you're not going to participate.
Display of resolve. One, shouting to be heard above the cheers, warned that this act would be a declaration of war. Nobody listened. They were too busy congratulating themselves on the inevitable capitulation of Great Britain. But just in case, they did agree to reconvene in half a year if Parliament didn't meet their demands. Half a year later, shots had been fired, and the American Revolutionary War was underway. So the Continental Congress met again. Despite everything that had happened, those who had been loyal to the crown still held out hope for peace. They decided to write another letter, because that first one had just worked so well. But this time, they would write directly to the king, and promise that they were still loyal and totally understood that his bad ministers had led him astray. King George refused to even read this letter, and declared all the colonies to be in open rebellion. So 0 for 2 on the letter thing. It didn't help that at the same time Congress had been drafting this petition for peace, they had also mustered a continental army, appointed a general by the name of George Washington, and begun to organize armed resistance. Many loyalists saw this as a necessary act of self-defense. Radicals saw it as the first step toward American independence. The idea of independence had begun to gain popularity, but the delegates of the Continental Congress could not act on it. Not only did many still hope to reconcile with Great Britain, but they also had to answer to the governments in their home colonies, and their governments said, absolutely not. Nope, do not even think about declaring independence. Once again, the time was right here for a thoughtful, strategic intervention by British Parliament, and once again, they did not miss the opportunity. They announced a blockade of all 13 colonies, and effectively expelled them from the empire. The last hope for reconciliation was snuffed out. The colonies stopped being colonies, and instead became self-governing states. They threw out their old systems of government, and the loyalists who ran them, and wrote new state constitutions. Their delegates at the Continental Congress received new instructions. Please, yes, do declare independence now. Heck, Rhode Island got so excited it declared itself an independent nation before anybody else could. Swept up in the enthusiasm for state building, in the summer of 1776, the Continental Congress resolved to declare independence, seek foreign allies, and write a constitution. Ideas for a constitution that brought the colonies together in an alliance had been floating around for decades, but the most influential model had come from Benjamin Franklin, a philosopher, statesman, and hobby kite enthusiast. Franklin had become fascinated by the Haudenosaunee, Native American peoples who had formed a confederacy of 6 nations. Their leader saw an echo of his own people's divided past in the British colonies and urged them to form a confederacy of their own. This idea had sparked Franklin's immense curiosity. He embarked on a study of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, European models of government, and even colonial alliances from the early days of settlement. In 1754, he had met with delegates from other colonies and laid out his Plan of Union, which synthesized elements of the governments that he'd studied into a uniquely American vision. The delegates enthusiastically adopted it. They brought it home to their governments, and their governments, just as enthusiastically, threw it out. The colonies had wanted to be able to determine their own fates, at least as far as Parliament would let them. Franklin's plan asked them to give up some of their political power to a central legislature, which would control their foreign affairs, creating yet another unwanted layer of supervision to get in their way. No thank you. But Franklin continued working on this plan. When he joined the Second Continental Congress in 1775, he revised it and presented it as a plan for how this multi-state Congress should be organized.
So the states, they didn't like the idea of all banding together and forming one government, did they?
No.
Why do you think that they weren't too enthusiastic about that idea? Anybody know? Pablo?
Because they wanted freedom.
They did want freedom. They did.
They didn't want to pay taxes. They didn't want everything that comes with it.
This is true. They were thinking about how things were when the British ruled the colonies. So they had this king and he wasn't even there, and they didn't want it to be like that again. They were afraid to form one government altogether because they were afraid it was going to turn out like England with the king, right?
They had basically been winging it for the last year, coasting off of popular approval and the indulgence of the colonies, but they had no official grant of authority. Franklin hoped to fix that, but he had acted just a bit too early. The independence movement needed about another year to warm up to the idea of a constitution, so his proposal was pushed aside again. Okay, so now fast forward back to where we were in 1776. At last, the pendulum is swinging in favor of a constitution to spell out the rights and responsibilities of the Continental Congress. An unlikely man takes the helm. John Dickinson, who has been a vocal loyalist, staunchly opposed to both independence and revolution. Yet he has also led the way for both of them. His newspaper articles about the need to resist British taxation through non-violent boycotts had shaped the early stages of colonial resistance. And since then, he has authored so many documents on behalf of the Congress that he'll later be known as the penman of the Revolution. Dickinson fears that the states aren't yet ready to govern themselves without the protections of British law. Seeing many of his fellow delegates argue for independence before they even have a constitution only makes him more convinced that they haven't thought through what independence requires. So he volunteers to lead the committee to draft a constitution and get things started right. He blows the dust off of Benjamin Franklin's plan and takes the name from the top of the page, Articles of Confederation. But this new country needs a better name than the United Colonies of North America. They're not colonies anymore, they're states. How about the United States of America? Over the next few weeks, Dickinson leads the creation of a new constitution and updates Franklin's work with his own ideas. He replaces the backbone of British law with a central legislature that has authority over the states. He guarantees civil rights at the national level and restricts foreign policy decisions to his new Confederation Congress. He's almost ready to submit his final draft when the moment he feared so much arrives. The Declaration of Independence is ready to go, and
Okay, so he said legislature. That's a word that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to, this video goes on to talk more about the Constitution, which we're not quite there yet. So we're going to take a look at this wonderful slideshow that I don't know how to present to make it bigger. Hold on. All right, how about that? So we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation. We have some vocabulary here that we need to know when we're going to talk about this. We have currency, commerce, legislature, article, and confederation. So first let's talk about currency. Anybody want to read that? Max?
A medium of exchange for goods and service money.
Right. That's currency basically means money. We've got some pictures here of some money. This says South Carolina, $60, I think. This says New York at the top, 2 shillings. Well, that's interesting. South Carolina and New York have different money. How about us? Do we have different money or do we all have the same money?
A little bit of a different.
Can you take some money that you got as change when you went to the store in Virginia and fly to California and spend that money?
Yeah.
You can. But back then, they couldn't. They each had their own money. So I'm going to give you guys some money.
How much is it worth?
I didn't put how much it was worth on there. So each of you have a state, right? So what state do you have, Max?
I have North Carolina.
Okay, and what about you? Okay, so you've got some money that you got in Delaware, right? So you want to buy something for Max. Maybe you want to buy some tea. How about some tea? So can you offer Max your money for the tea? Is Max going to take your money? No, because it's not like Max's money. He wants money he can spend in his state. So he wants the pink money here. So if you give him the brown money, he's not going to be able to spend that in his state. He can only spend that in your state. So that's not good. And the same thing if you try to trade your money for some supplies from Humani. He's got different money too, right? So this is totally not working out, right? Not a good thing. So currency is money, and the states each had their own currency. So not working out very well, right? All right, the next word we need to know is commerce. Somebody like to read that? Kimani?
The commerce,
Mm-hmm.
the activity of buying and selling.
Exactly. Buying and selling is commerce. See some people here buying some things at some shops. So we would need our currency to buy and sell. So commerce is difficult right now because we've already identified that we don't have the same money. Legislature. Would somebody like to read this? Pablo?
An organized body of having the power to make laws.
Right. So we've got a bunch of people sitting here. This is the legislature. It's a branch of the government that has the power to make laws. How many branches of government do we currently have?
I want to say 5 or 7, but I don't exactly know.
Anybody know? We have 3 branches of government,
What?
and they each serve different functions. But all they had when they wrote the Articles of Confederation was a legislature. They only had this one body of government. Because once again, they're scared. They don't want things to end up like they were in England. They don't want this king and he controls everything. They're all afraid. They've become independent states and they want to hold on to that. So when they wrote the Articles of Confederation, they only have the legislature that makes laws. Because, you have to be able to make laws, right?
Yes.
Now we have article. Who'd like to read that? Marley?
A
A piece of writing, that's right. So we've got a piece of writing right here. Who can tell me what this document is? You're going to be able to recognize it by these words, to all to whom. It's not the Constitution, right? No, because that starts off with we the people. So this is actually a picture of the Articles of Confederation. So you can know that by it says to all to whom. Look at the way it's written. If we had a document today, we would probably type it up on our computer, right?
Mhm.
But what did they do here? Yes, Max?
It looks really weird. It looks to me like maybe trying to write in cursive.
Right. It's kind of like cursive writing, right? So this is how they had to do things at the time. And when we finish our slideshow, I'm going to show you guys something. So remember this slide and this writing, okay? Confederation. Anybody want to read? Pablo?
An organization of a number of parties, people.
Right. Parties means people. So we have the Articles of Confederation. So this is your confederation here. It's a bunch of people that are getting together to write the Articles of Confederation. So we said article was a document, right? Piece of paper with something written on it. Why did the Articles of Confederation fail? So they were trying to write a constitution to bring everybody together, but it didn't work out. Why not? Who wants to read? Max?
Weak central government.
Right, they had a weak central government. Like I said, they were afraid to make things too strong because they didn't want to wind up like the British, right? So that's the first reason. What about the next thing? Anybody want to read? Pablo?
Congress has no power to tax or regulate commerce.
Right. Remember in our video we were talking about how states didn't want taxes and they refused to pay?
Mhm.
Well, they wrote this document and Congress had no power to tax people, so they had no way to generate money, the federal government. What about the next one? This is the one we just talked about, Max?
No common currency.
Right, no common currency. Everybody in the states, like you guys, had their own separate money. So it was really hard for them to buy things from each other. All right, the next one we haven't talked about yet. Anybody like to read it? Max?
Each state had one vote. Regularly. Oh, sorry.
All right, so each state had one vote. So Delaware is a little tiny state, right? Not that many people, but they had one vote. But then what about New York? It's a much bigger state and it has a lot of people to represent, but they only have one vote too. So that was kind of not working out because it wasn't really representing the people, right? Did you have a question, Kimani? You want to read the last one? Okay, go ahead.
Only had one branch of government. Legislative.
Right. So we talked about that. They only had the one branch of government, the legislature. And what does the legislature do? Yes?
A group of people.
They are a group of people. What does the legislature do? They do one thing.
Make laws.
Make laws. That's right. Good. So that's the only thing they can do. They can't tax. They can't generate money from the government. All they can do is make laws. The failure of the Articles of Confederation led to the creation of the Constitution of the United States. You can see that's a picture of the Constitution because it starts with "we the people," right?
Mhm.
Look at this thing down here. What is this? It's a pen. So look at this long document, and the Constitution is pretty long. See the writing on there?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to show you guys something. I'm going to use this desk right here. Everybody can see? This is the same as that white one that's on the screen. It's called a quill. It's a quill pen. See, it's got this little point on it. This is what they used to write with. I'm gonna show you how difficult it was for them to write that whole document. You guys can try this too. This is ink, it will spill, we're gonna be careful with it. So they had to take this pen and they had to dip it in this ink. Let's try to write what they wrote. Uh-oh, I'm running out of ink, aren't I? Let me dip it in here again. Uh-oh, I'm running out of ink. Let me dip it in here again. Uh-oh, look, I ran out of ink again.
Yeah.
Let me dip it in here again. Look what's happened again.
No.
I have run out of ink again. That's all I wrote. How many times did I dip this pen in this ink? A bunch of times. This is how they had to write that. How long do you think it took them?
I think for like a year or months.
Took them a long time, didn't it? Would anybody like to try this?
Yeah.
Okay. So be careful with the ink. Don't dip it in too far. Just write anything you want. Use the flat side. Yeah, like that. Oh, look, you're running out of ink. You barely made it, right? Max, you want to try? Max has a short name and he still ran out of ink. Well, yeah, you ran out, or you can make your whole name. Who else wants to try? Imani, you want to try? Imani's running out of ink too. You got it. You want to try? Okay. Yeah, you gotta be careful with it. There you go. Using the nibs on the pen takes some getting used to. The pen came with a bunch of those. That's the other thing. They didn't want to be all blobby, so they couldn't put too much ink on it. But they had to write, so they had to put enough on it. So you guys get the idea, right? All right, let's get this ink out of here before we all end up with it all over us. So you guys get the idea here, right? What do you think? Took them a long time, but we had a lot of respect for them now, don't we?
Yes.
How would you like it if you had to write your schoolwork like that?
Yeah, that would be.
It would take you a while. I'm going to show you something else too. I'm just going to do this one. Yes, Max?
You know why I had a feather with the pen?
I don't know, just to make it look fancy, I guess.
It does look like.
But see, like this one didn't have the little metal nibs. It was just the feather by itself. They just cut the end off the feather. So after they wrote what they were gonna write,
It's just the wax.
say, this is the same thing you'd have to do if you wrote a letter to somebody. And then they wanted to seal the letter. Did they have tape? No, they didn't have any tape. What they had was this.
Right.
It's you make a wax seal to seal your envelope.
Oh.
Only Miss Thompson's going to do this. Let's try this and see if it works, okay?
Does it have a smell to it?
Oh. All right, you have to let it burn here for a minute. Oh, look, the wax is starting to drip off. Slowly.
Going a little bit faster.
So they're trying to send a letter here. You would just lick the envelope or take a piece of tape and put it on here, right? Take you like 2 seconds. So after they spent all that time writing, now they have to do this. Almost there. We're getting there. All right. So now that they've done that,
Yeah, or
they take this thing called a seal, and they each have their own, and they push it into the wax like this. And that's how they seal their envelope. See, it's closed now. Everybody had their own seal with whatever they wanted on it. Maybe it was their family crest or something else. I got this one with the cat and the moon on it. And that's how they seal their envelope. See, it's closed now. So after you go to all the trouble to write that, then you do this. Neat, huh? All right. Is this out? Yes. All right, what do I do with my seal?
I dropped it.
Twice. I'm gonna have to start sealing all my envelopes like that now that I have this wax and this seal, right? It'll be very fancy. All right, so I wanted to show you guys that while we were talking about the document. All right, so we're gonna go back over. Did we do this slide already? Oh, we did. Okay. So he said weak central government, no common currency, only one legislative branch of government, no power to tax or regulate commerce, and each state only had the one vote. All right, so now we have some questions. Our first question is, who would like to read? Go ahead, Max.
What is currency?
Right. What is currency, Max?
Well, I think currency is just a person. Currency is the money that they use.
Right. Currency is money. Very good. Who wants to read next? Pablo?
What were the writers of the Articles of Confederation trying to do?
Who knows the answer to that? What were they trying to do? Anybody? Nobody knows? Max?
I think I'm not sure.
You're not sure? Anybody can help him out? So we know that the Articles of Confederation was what they wrote first, and it developed into the Constitution, right?
Mhm.
So they were trying to write a constitution, a small c constitution, that would bring all the states together to make them into one nation. They tried real hard, but as we have learned here today, they made a few mistakes, right? So it wasn't working out. Who can name one reason the Articles failed? Is your hand up, Max?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Because the first one they sent to the king.
He sent the letter to the king, and he pretty much told him, he wouldn't even read the second letter, right?
Mhm.
Right. He was not in favor of this. He wanted to keep ruling. Paulo, you had your hand up?
They had different currency.
Right. No common currency is one of the reasons it failed, because everybody had their own currency, as we demonstrated, because each of you guys have different ones. Can anybody name another reason? Yes?
They had a weak government.
Yes, they had a weak central government. We talked about why that was, right? Because they were afraid. They didn't want a monarchy like they had in England ruling them anymore. Everybody was scared. The states had finally gotten independence for themselves. They wanted to rule themselves, and they weren't too sure that they wanted to be part of a big government, right? So what do we have today? We have the federal government, right? And that kind of rules over the whole United States. But then each state has their own government, right? So you can make laws for just your state, or the federal government can make laws for everybody, right? And then we have counties like Chesterfield County that we live in. They have their own government too. So they can make laws like Chesterfield County can decide that there's no parking on the street between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., right?
Yeah.
Well, what if you go to a county in New York? Is it going to be the same there?
No.
No, because each county is making their own laws about things. But what about taxes?
Taxes.
Yes,
Some places don't have taxes and some places do.
that's right. Like there are some states where if you buy certain things from the store, there's no tax on them. But if you come to Virginia, there is a tax on those things. Because the state decides what they want to do. There are some laws they can make for themselves. And then the federal government can make other laws that everybody has to adhere to. Yes?
Because some original Virginia, some of those things got caused tax. That's why they got in debt.
Yes, they were in debt for some different reasons. And like you're saying, one of the reasons is because the government couldn't tax anybody. That's one of the reasons the articles failed. Very good, Max. Because they couldn't tax anybody, so they couldn't raise any money. Right? Does anybody have any questions about this? No? Did you guys learn about the Articles of Confederation?
Yes.
Did you have fun?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. That's going to be our lesson for today. Thanks, guys.
Was to give this back.